When people hear the phrase "ignore a woman," they often imagine a tactic, a calculated move designed to provoke emotion, create uncertainty, or force someone to seek your attention. That is where most people misunderstand psychology. They focus on controlling another person when the real source of power has always been controlling themselves. The most influential individuals are not masters of manipulation. They are masters of emotional discipline. They understand that silence has value only when it emerges from inner stability rather than from a desire to punish, test, or manipulate someone else. Think about how most people behave when they become emotionally invested in another person. They send another message when there is no reply. They explain themselves repeatedly after being misunderstood. They chase clarification, reassurance, and approval because silence makes them uncomfortable. In reality, it is rarely the silence that hurts them. It is what the silence forces them to confront within themselves. The mind hates uncertainty. When there is no immediate response, it begins filling the empty space with assumptions, fears, and insecurities. This is not a weakness unique to one gender. It is simply human psychology. Those who lack emotional control become prisoners of this uncertainty. They feel compelled to act. They convince themselves that one more explanation will solve everything, one more apology will change someone's mind, or one more message will restore the connection. But every action taken from emotional desperation quietly communicates something far more powerful than the words themselves. It communicates dependence, and dependence weakens influence because it places your emotional state in someone else's hands. The truly composed individual understands a different principle. They know that every unnecessary reaction reveals information about them. It reveals what they fear losing. It reveals where their confidence depends on external validation. It reveals that another person's attention has become more valuable than their own peace of mind. This is why emotional restraint has always been admired throughout history. Leaders, philosophers, and strategists recognized that the person who controls their emotions cannot easily be controlled by others. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that events are not disturbing by themselves. It is our judgment about them that creates suffering. The same principle applies in every relationship. Someone else's silence does not diminish your value. Only your reaction determines whether you surrender your emotional balance. Notice the people who naturally command respect. They are rarely the loudest. They rarely explain every decision they make. They do not rush to defend themselves against every criticism or misunderstanding. Their confidence allows space to exist between stimulus and response. In that space lies freedom. While others react impulsively, they observe. While others chase certainty, they cultivate patience. Their silence is not empty, it is filled with self-control. Many people mistakenly believe silence is a weapon. In reality, silence is a mirror. It reflects the emotional state of the person using it. If your silence is driven by resentment, revenge, or the hope that someone will become anxious enough to return, then you are still emotionally dependent on them. Your silence is merely another form of chasing. It is simply quieter, but when silence comes from genuine self-respect, everything changes. You stop feeling obligated to prove your worth. You stop convincing people to appreciate you. You stop exhausting yourself explaining intentions to those determined to misunderstand you. Instead, your energy shifts toward building a life so meaningful that your peace no longer depends on another person's immediate attention. Psychologically, this creates an interesting effect. Human beings naturally notice what appears emotionally independent. We are curious about those who seem comfortable without constant validation, because such confidence is increasingly rare. But this should never become the goal. If you practice silence merely to trigger curiosity, you remain trapped in manipulation. Your happiness still depends on controlling someone else's perception. Real strength is different. It is waking up each morning focused on your mission instead of someone's messages. It is investing in your health, your knowledge, your work, and your purpose while allowing relationships to complement your life rather than define it. Ironically, people often become more attracted to those who possess this mindset, not because they are playing psychological games, but because genuine independence is deeply compelling. Consider how much emotional energy people waste every day trying to manage other people's opinions. They replay conversations repeatedly in their minds. They wonder why someone responded differently than expected. They search for hidden meanings behind every delayed reply. This constant mental negotiation drains creativity, confidence, and peace. It transforms intelligent people into anxious overthinkers. Now imagine redirecting that same energy inward. Imagine becoming fascinated not with another person's behavior, but with your own reactions. Why did that silence disturb you? Why does delayed attention feel threatening? Why do you feel compelled to explain yourself? These questions lead to growth because they expose the hidden beliefs shaping your emotional life. This is where emotional control becomes a lifelong discipline rather than a temporary technique. Every uncomfortable moment becomes an opportunity to strengthen your patience. Every unanswered message becomes practice in releasing attachment to outcomes you cannot control. Every misunderstanding becomes a reminder that not everyone needs to understand you for your life to have meaning. As this discipline develops, something remarkable begins to happen. You become less reactive, less anxious, and less dependent on external approval. Your conversations become calmer because you are no longer speaking from fear. Your decisions become clearer because they are guided by principles instead of emotions. Even your presence changes. People sense when someone carries themselves with quiet certainty. There is no need for dramatic displays or endless words. Confidence has its own language, and often it speaks through silence. Always remember, however, that silence should never become an excuse to avoid honest communication. Healthy relationships require openness, empathy, and mutual respect. Emotional discipline is not emotional avoidance. It means choosing your words carefully, speaking with intention, and refusing to let impulse dictate your actions. Sometimes the strongest response is silence. Other times, the strongest response is calm, honest conversation. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. The person who cannot control their emotions will always feel compelled to control other people. But the person who masters themselves no longer needs to. That is where genuine influence begins, not in manipulation, but in inner freedom. Once you begin to understand that real silence is rooted in self-control rather than manipulation, another transformation becomes possible. You stop asking, "How do I make someone think about me?" and begin asking a far more powerful question. How do I become someone who cannot be emotionally controlled? That shift changes everything, because the greatest form of influence has never been about controlling another person's emotions. It has always been about refusing to surrender your own. Every relationship, whether romantic, personal, or professional, contains moments of uncertainty. Messages go unanswered. Plans change. Expectations are disappointed. Opinions clash. These moments often feel insignificant on the surface, yet they reveal something profound beneath it. They expose where your emotional foundation truly stands. Most people imagine emotional strength as the absence of feeling. That is a misunderstanding. Emotional strength is not becoming cold or detached from humanity. It is feeling deeply without allowing your emotions to dictate every decision. It is the ability to experience disappointment without becoming desperate, rejection without losing dignity, and uncertainty without abandoning your peace of mind. Human beings naturally seek certainty because certainty feels safe. When someone responds exactly as expected, your mind relaxes. But when that pattern breaks, when someone becomes distant, delays a reply, or behaves unpredictably, your brain immediately begins searching for explanations. It fills the silence with assumptions, fears, and imagined scenarios. Often, these stories have little connection to reality. Yet they feel convincing because uncertainty magnifies emotion. This is why emotionally reactive people become so easy to influence. They are constantly responding to imagined threats instead of objective facts. A delayed response becomes rejection. A disagreement becomes betrayal. Temporary distance becomes permanent loss. Their emotions create a reality that does not exist. Those who understand psychology recognize this tendency within themselves. Instead of immediately reacting, they observe their thoughts with curiosity. They ask themselves, am I responding to facts or am I responding to fear? That simple pause creates enormous psychological freedom. It interrupts the automatic cycle of emotional reaction and replaces it with conscious choice. This is where emotional detachment begins, not detachment from people, but detachment from emotional chaos. It means refusing to let temporary emotions become permanent decisions. It means recognizing that every feeling deserves acknowledgement, but not every feeling deserves obedience. Many people believe that emotional intensity proves love, commitment, or sincerity. In reality, emotional intensity often reflects emotional dependence. When your happiness rises and falls entirely according to another person's behavior, you have unknowingly handed them authority over your internal world. Whether they intended to or not becomes irrelevant. The result is the same. Your peace no longer belongs to you. History consistently rewards those who maintain composure under pressure. Great leaders were rarely those who reacted first. They were those who observed longest. In moments of crisis, everyone else became consumed by emotion, while they remained anchored in reason. Relationships operate according to a similar principle. The individual who maintains clarity during emotional storms naturally becomes the stabilizing force within the interaction. This does not mean suppressing emotion. Suppression only buries emotions until they emerge in unhealthy ways. True emotional mastery involves acknowledging what you feel without becoming enslaved by it. You recognize disappointment without allowing it to become bitterness. You recognize attraction without allowing it to become obsession. You recognize loneliness without allowing it to become desperation. Consider how much suffering comes not from events themselves, but from resistance to them. Someone chooses to leave. Someone misunderstands you. Someone fails to appreciate your value. These experiences undoubtedly hurt. But suffering multiplies when you refuse to accept reality. You begin negotiating with the past, replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, or desperately attempting to change another person's mind. Emotionally centered individuals understand that acceptance is not surrender. Acceptance simply means acknowledging reality exactly as it is before deciding what to do next. Ironically, this acceptance often restores the very power people lose through resistance. Once you stop fighting what has already happened, your attention returns to what you can actually influence, your own actions. One of the greatest signs of maturity is learning to let people reveal themselves without interrupting the process. Too often, individuals rush to explain, defend, persuade, or convince. They attempt to control how others perceive them. But character does not require constant advertisement. Over time, consistency speaks louder than explanation. Imagine standing beside a river after a storm. If you stir the muddy water with your hands, it remains cloudy. But if you simply leave it alone, the sediment naturally settles, and the water becomes clear again. The human mind works much the same way. Every impulsive reaction stirs emotional confusion. Patience allows clarity to return. This is why emotionally disciplined people often appear calm during situations that overwhelm others. It is not because they experience less emotion. It is because they trust time more than impulse. They understand that clarity rarely arrives during emotional intensity. It emerges after emotions have settled. As you develop this discipline, another remarkable shift occurs. You stop measuring your value by external responses. A compliment no longer defines your confidence, and criticism no longer destroys it. Approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Rejection becomes disappointing but survivable. You begin living according to internal principles instead of external reactions. Ironically, this quiet independence often changes how people perceive you. Individuals are naturally drawn to those who possess emotional stability because stability creates safety. They sense that you are not attempting to control them, nor are you easily controlled yourself. Your presence communicates confidence without demanding attention. However, this should never become another strategy for attracting people. The moment emotional discipline becomes a performance designed to gain validation, its foundation collapses. The objective is not to appear strong. The objective is to become strong. There is a profound difference between image and substance. One depends on spectators. The other exists even when no one is watching. Perhaps the greatest freedom a person can experience is realizing they no longer need immediate answers to remain at peace. They no longer fear silence because silence no longer threatens their identity. They no longer panic when life becomes uncertain because uncertainty is accepted as part of being human. Instead of chasing emotional security through other people, they cultivate it within themselves, and that inner stability transforms every relationship they enter. They communicate more honestly because fear no longer dictates their words. They love more deeply because attachment no longer overshadows respect. They walk away more peacefully when necessary because they understand that protecting their dignity is not an act of pride, it is an act of wisdom. When you become emotionally centered, you stop treating every challenge as a battle to win. Instead, you begin treating every challenge as an opportunity to know yourself more deeply. That is where true influence begins, not through controlling another person's emotions, but through becoming the kind of person whose peace cannot be easily shaken. If you have followed this journey carefully, you will notice that the conversation has never truly been about ignoring someone. It has been about something much deeper. It has been about refusing to ignore yourself. That is the distinction that separates temporary tactics from lasting transformation. Anyone can learn a technique that captures attention for a moment. Very few people develop the character that commands respect for a lifetime. This brings us to the final principle. Real attraction is created by purpose, healthy boundaries, and self-respect, not by emotional games. Many people spend years trying to become more interesting to others, while neglecting the far more important question: have I become interesting to myself? They constantly monitor another person's attention, approval, or affection, believing that fulfillment lies just one successful relationship away. But psychology repeatedly teaches the opposite. People who build their identity around external validation eventually lose themselves. Those who build their identity around purpose become naturally compelling because their lives have direction independent of anyone else's opinion. Purpose has a unique psychological effect. It reorganizes your priorities. When you wake up each morning with meaningful work, personal growth, physical discipline, creative ambition, or a mission larger than your ego, your emotional energy begins flowing toward creation. Instead of constant reaction, you stop checking your phone every few minutes because your attention is invested elsewhere. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly someone replies because your life contains deeper sources of meaning. This is why individuals who are deeply committed to their purpose often appear calm and emotionally grounded. It is not because they care less about relationships, it is because relationships have found their proper place. They enrich life, but they do not define it. There is a subtle but powerful difference between wanting companionship and needing validation. Wanting companionship reflects emotional health. Needing validation reflects emotional dependence. The first creates relationships based on mutual respect. The second creates relationships driven by fear, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, or fear of being alone. Ironically, many people become so afraid of losing someone that they slowly lose themselves instead. They begin sacrificing their values to avoid conflict. They abandon personal goals to keep another person comfortable. They apologize for things they did not do simply to preserve temporary peace. At first, these compromises seem small, but over time they reshape identity itself. One day they look in the mirror and realize they have become someone they barely recognize. Self-respect demands something different. It requires the courage to maintain your principles even when doing so risks disappointing someone else. It asks you to remain honest when dishonesty would be easier. It encourages you to communicate clearly rather than manipulate indirectly. Most importantly, it reminds you that genuine affection can never grow where authenticity has disappeared. Many people misunderstand the idea of scarcity. They hear that scarcity creates value and immediately think they should become emotionally unavailable or intentionally distant. But artificial scarcity is transparent. People eventually recognize when someone is creating distance merely to provoke attention. That behavior does not communicate confidence. It communicates insecurity disguised as strategy. True scarcity is different. It happens naturally because your life is already full. You have responsibilities, goals, passions, friendships, family, learning, health, and personal ambitions competing for your time. You are not difficult to reach because you are playing games. You are simply living a meaningful life. Your attention becomes valuable because it is given intentionally rather than indiscriminately. This distinction matters enormously. There is a world of difference between withholding attention to manipulate someone and investing your attention wisely because you value your own time. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in purpose. History repeatedly reminds us that individuals remembered for their influence rarely spent their lives chasing approval. They built ideas, they solved problems, they developed mastery. Their confidence grew from competence rather than constant reassurance. They understood that respect follows contribution, not performance. The same principle applies to personal relationships. If you spend all your energy trying to appear attractive, mysterious, or emotionally unavailable, you neglect the qualities that actually sustain meaningful connections: integrity, reliability, confidence, empathy, and emotional maturity. There is another lesson worth remembering. Healthy relationships are not contests of power. They are partnerships built upon mutual respect. Emotional discipline should never become emotional punishment. Silence should never replace honest communication when communication is needed. Walking away should never become an attempt to force someone to return. These behaviors confuse control with strength. Real strength allows people freedom. It allows someone to choose you rather than feel pressured into choosing you. It allows disagreement without panic. It allows distance without resentment. It allows endings without hatred. This kind of emotional maturity cannot be faked because it grows only through self-awareness and experience. As your sense of purpose deepens, something unexpected begins to happen. You become less interested in convincing others of your worth. You no longer feel compelled to announce your value because your actions demonstrate it consistently. Quiet confidence replaces loud validation. Patience replaces urgency. Discipline replaces emotional impulse. People often ask why emotionally centered individuals seem naturally attractive. The answer is surprisingly simple. Confidence is attractive because confidence signals safety. Purpose is attractive because purpose creates direction. Emotional stability is attractive because it reduces unnecessary conflict. None of these qualities depend upon manipulation. They emerge naturally from a life that is internally organized rather than externally dependent. But perhaps the greatest reward is not attracting more people. The greatest reward is attracting better relationships. When you stop chasing validation, you begin recognizing genuine character. You become less impressed by charm without substance. You become more attentive to consistency than chemistry alone. You stop confusing excitement with compatibility. Instead of asking, "How do I make this person stay?" you begin asking, "Does this relationship align with my values, my peace, and my future?" That question changes everything. It shifts your focus away from earning acceptance and toward building a life worthy of your own respect. Suddenly, rejection loses much of its power because you realize that not every connection is meant to last. Some people enter your life to teach lessons rather than remain forever. Others leave simply because your paths no longer align. Neither outcome diminishes your value. As you embrace this perspective, silence becomes something entirely different from what most people imagine. It is no longer a tactic designed to provoke curiosity. It becomes evidence of inner peace. You no longer speak because you fear being forgotten. You speak when your words add value. You no longer chase because you fear loneliness. You walk confidently because your direction comes from within. And perhaps that is the deepest psychological truth of all. The people who appear impossible to manipulate are not those who have mastered countless techniques. They are those who have mastered themselves. Their identity is not built upon applause, attention, or approval. It is built upon purpose, discipline, integrity, and quiet confidence. So before you try to influence anyone else, ask yourself one final question. Is the life I am building worthy of my own respect? If the answer is yes, everything else becomes secondary. Respect follows. Meaningful relationships follow. Peace follows.